Welcome to session 4 of our peer-to-peer boot camp. I'm going to just go ahead and get us started. So yes, please introduce yourself in the chat and what is your favorite thing about spring? Or if you all do have a spring break, where are you going? What are you doing? Let us know if you have any vacation plans. I'd love to hear where everybody is headed to. I know Nick just mentioned he got back from Tahoe, and I'm super jealous. So if you have any travel plans, put them in the chat. If not, what's your favorite thing about spring? I know I just got back from Puerto Rico, and all the trees are like blooming all around me. And so it's just been really, really beautiful outside. We are recording, and really kind of the format of this session is going to be, I'm going to really turn it over to our speakers today to really talk through this topic and some resources that they have to offer. And then we're also going to go into breakout sessions to really talk through this in more detail. So I'm going to go to the next slide. And then this is kind of the format, just so you all are aware. We have so many different topics that we want to get through. I know Nancy, Ben, Annalisa, and I, we've met about this several times, and we're just like, how should we put this together in like this hour and a half during the session? Because there's so much to talk about. So we decided to kind of really like start with the back of the house, kind of move into the cafeteria, and then really thinking more about waste. So that's kind of the general flow, but as you can see, there's a lot of overlap. That's why I put little overlapping circles, because all of these topics sort of overlap with each other. And, you know, one of the conversations that we want to have later in this in our breakout groups is really around like, you know, what other information is needed, and should this be its own series? Because I think we could literally do 6 sessions all on these different topics, and we're going to like really kind of condense it into today's session. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy.
Thanks, Nora. It's so nice to be here with everybody. I love this group. Okay, so in the past, a lot of these efforts that we're talking about today have been like asks and like trying to find, you know, the passionate tree hugger, for lack of a better term. But now we have state legislation that's in our back pocket that really helps move this work forward. So just wanting to kind of address that, you know, we want to do all these good things for the right reason, but then also moving towards this goal on climate change that our state has done. And so it's a lot of work to meet these regulations for the mandates, but they're with really important intentions on fighting climate change. So the main one, and I'm sure everybody's familiar with, is SB 1383, that's in effect now, right, with having to have waste sorting bins wherever that type of waste is generated. Staff are trained on an annual basis, that there's inspection piece happening, and then looking at recovering food by 2024. So that's just our backdrop on just remembering on the requirements from the state perspective. That's really helpful to use, because then if somebody's saying, well, this isn't possible, it's like, well, we just need to figure out how to do it so that we're in compliance. End of story. Sometimes that helps with a lot of staff. Then from the higher level, the more visionary perspective is our next slide. So everybody here, I know, are visionaries, right? That's one of the reasons why, you know, doing this work and feeding our kids good, healthy food. But just keeping that vision on a really environmental sustainable kitchen and cafeteria. And I liked a share out that was done through a colleague that does work for plastic pollution, is this 10-10-80 rule, where 80% of your time is spent on visioning. 10% is on kind of troubleshooting. The other 10% is, you know, the program implementation, but 80% on vision. And it just, I don't know, for me, it's inspiring. And the idea that if you vision it long enough, it will become reality. And the example that I give on this is with the partnership that Oakland Unified has with Ben at Center for Environmental Health is figuring out on these reusables. And just 4 months ago, I heard, reusables not in my lifetime. 4 months later, we wrote a grant to see if we can get a dishwashing service to have reusables in our schools. So it's just staying with that vision, because reality can happen with that. So with that, I'll pass it over to Ben.
Thanks, Nancy. Hi, my name's Ben Schleifer. I am the food coordinator at the Center for Environmental Health. We're based out of Oakland, but we talk about it on the national scale. And my focus is mainly on foodware in K through 12 schools. But I have worked with Annalisa and Nancy in the past on waste. So I always have my eyes looking at the trash because that's where I come from. But CEH is a nonprofit. We're dedicated to protecting the public's health from exposure to toxic chemicals. And we work with large purchasers like schools to make sure they utilize their buying power to incentivize the production of environmentally preferred purchasing and products. Next slide, please. Speaking of waste, this is often not on people's radars, but we actually throw away a lot of stuff related to the K through 12 schools in the cafeteria. The US serves over 5 billion meals every year. That's a huge number, and I have no idea how to understand that. So I tend to point to like a sample, like an elementary school. Let's say it has 450 students. If every student got served, and let's say it's in California, so now every student will get served, that is 81,000 meals a year. If all those are served on disposable trays, that's 81,000 foam trays. I did a price check last week with the supply chain stuff. That's about $9,000 you're spending on styrofoam, which would weigh about 2,000 pounds, which is the same weight as a Mitsubishi's Mirage. And actually the cost of the car is around $10,000. So you could buy 81,000 foam trays or a car, which to me is like, there's really no question. But also the volume of these trays is crazy. So if we were to stack all those trays on top of each other, it'd be over 400 feet tall when stacked. So it's just a crazy amount of volume. Luckily, California doesn't really do styrofoam as much anymore. Next slide, please. The thing that we have replaced it with are compostable food trays, which are great. Well, they're great if you have the infrastructure in your school to do the sorting. So you need composting infrastructure at your school site that can take these trays and take it to a compost facility and grind it up and turn it into soil. If you don't, they might end up in the landfill. And when they end up in the landfill, they could actually become methane. And they're also more expensive than the styrofoam trays. Again, last week price check of these trays were about $17,000 for that 81,000 meals. So like a small elementary school could be spending like $20,000 on foodware that the students use for maybe 30 minutes and then throw away forever. So there's something about this disposable problem that doesn't quite sit right with me. But the other thing that maybe you are not aware of, next slide, please, is that these disposables are actually quite toxic. The polystyrene, the styrofoam, that's long been established. It's a possible carcinogen, which means we can't do the human studies, but it can give you cancer. But the thing that you might not be aware of is that these trays have something called PFAS in them, which is per and polyfluorinated alkaline substances. I know, who here has a degree in chemistry? Who here should have a degree? No one. But this chemical is unfortunately in some of these molded fiber products, like some molded fiber products like this one, or some molded fiber products like this one. Does this look familiar to anyone? It's like, there's a reason I put it in a plastic bag, because these PFAS have been established to get ADHD, but also it's a hormone disruptor. So it messes with puberty, it messes with your metabolism, and it can give you cancer. And also the recent studies have been showing it's been messing with your immune system. And so the folks have been shown that have a higher amount of PFAS in their blood are more likely to get COVID and actually have it more severely than those who don't. And so again, I have two trays here. You can probably imagine which one has PFAS, but which one doesn't. But if you look at these trays, there's zero labeling on like which organization or which company makes them. There's just no labeling. So who as a nutrition service staff has the time to be like, oh, let me figure out which of these trays has PFAS? And, CEH would be happy to test for anyone in the school realm. You can send us samples, we'll test and get it back to you. We've been finding the molded fiber products, about 86% of them have been showing high on the PFAS. If they're high, over 100 parts per million fluorine, they're no longer compostable. The compost BPI will not certify it. And moreover, it's really bad for your staff as well as the students' health. So this is another thing to worry about during a time when you have so much stuff to worry about. What can we do? Maybe next slide can help. Oh, it does. There are safer disposables out there. Like, again, I don't touch the ones with the PFAS. I put them in the plastic bag. This one's a safe one. We've tested it. And there's a new certification that CEH has put out called Green Screen Certified. And we partnered with a group called Clean Production Action, but it asks the manufacturers to list all their chemicals. And then we check against a database of 10,000 plus chemicals of concern and make sure that everywhere along the manufacturing chain, they have none of those nasty chemicals, which is great. But it's new, so 2021, and it's just come out, and there's not been as much adoption. So if you want to use these molded fiber products, like, tell the people you're buying from, we would love to see it green screen certified. But to me, this is not really where I should be putting our solutions. The problem is a little deeper than that. Can we go to the next slide, please? I mean, like, do you really want to deal with the new stuff that's coming out? We have no idea what they're going to put in, and they don't have to tell us. And moreover, like during times of strife such as this one, supply chains can get really out of whack. Right now we're seeing the foodware is about 50% the cost it was pre-pandemic, which is like outrageous. We're seeing schools competing with other schools on purchasing foodware, which is ridiculous. There is no reason you should be trying to compete with a school in Iowa on getting these trays to come 3 weeks after the fact you order it. There, you have better use for your time. And like, I just think there should be a better way, like maybe something that's more local or sustainable or cheaper or more resilient. And I think, what did we used to do in the past? Next slide. Oh yeah, we used to get served up stuff that got washed every day. Mind blown. Back in the 80s, there was an active push to rip dish machines out of schools in California. I don't know why. But the reusables could be something that we could adopt. They're COVID safe. They're available in safe material like stainless steel. And since you're using it over and over again, you don't have to keep purchasing it. It has better life cycle impact. It prevents climate chaos. Remember, some of this stuff is being shipped in from China for, again, 30 minutes of use, and then the kids discard it. You can save money. And the one that I really like is like, if we're going to get out of this plastic pollution situation, we have to teach the kids that throwing away stuff is bad. And if we're not doing that at the school level, I don't know what level we should be teaching them at. But this is a good value thing to move the students to reusables. I also think it makes the food look better. I don't have the studies to back that up yet, but I'm hoping to get those soon. Needless to say, CEH is quite biased to the solution. So what are we doing in our biasness to the solution? Next slide, please. We have put out a planning guide as well as a toolkit to help transform K-12 schools. This planning guide is a 12-step plan on how to begin the conversation to do it. And again, start small is the best advice I could give you. Like, look at those utensils, those sport kits. Whose favorite is the sport kit? Nobody's. Imagine instead of using sport kits every day, we could use, I don't know, reusable utensils, or even just have the sport kits like offered and not given. That would be a huge step. But yeah, start small. And then we have this 12-step plan. I encourage you all to check it out. But we also have some case studies for you. Next one. before we get to the case studies, we also have this lovely gentleman who works for a nonprofit called Plastic Free Restaurants. He will buy schools the reusables. And let me say that just one more time, because no one really hears this. He will purchase all the reusables for the school if it's replacing a plastic product. And he just told me recently, he will buy you all new trays. If you send us the trays and they test high for PFAS, he will buy you all new reusable stainless steel trays, up to $5 per unit. So he's been spending $10,000 for like Berkeley Unified to buy them stainless steel cups, to buy them stainless steel trays, to buy them stainless steel little portion containers, like you name it. If it's replacing a disposable, he will hook you up. So if that is something you'd be interested in, that's a huge barrier removed at that cost. If you're interested, contact me. We can put you in touch. He's really easy to work with. He's been cutting checks left and right, and he's really excited. Next slide. So we do have some case studies. There's this great school down in Glendale, California, Franklin Elementary, where it was just active parents. They were just like, I am over all the waste at school. They have about 650 students. About half of them were eating at the school every day. Came to about 150,000 disposables in a year. That's a lot. So they called up a company called Hobart and started negotiating. Hobart ended up paying for the entire dish machine. They said they would not do that every time, but they wanted to promote that the dish machine is an option. And they save about $7,000 a year just on purchasing costs. And that's not including the waste costs. They said it's about a half an hour for 2 staff increase in time and labor, which seems to be very reasonable. The PTA was just on fire, but they wanted to spread it to the whole district. So they actually have a state bill called SB 1255 that just passed out of the Environmental Committee and is now going to appropriations. And this would provide $40,000 for dish machine renovations for each school site. And so they're looking for folks to sign on. If you'd be interested to sign on, I'll put something in the chat where you can email me and then we can get you to sign on, because $40,000 just for dish machines would be a game changer in California. Next slide. So again, dish machine, that might be a bridge too far. I understand it would be an actual heavy lift, but there's other ways to work around it, especially if your kitchen has a 3-sink system. Bishop O'Dude, a high school in Oakland with 12,000 students, saved about $6,500 a year. And they were just using those red baskets that I have a picture of with a paper liner. And again, most of the foods at school, especially at the high school, it's finger food anyways. So you don't actually need this for very many meals. They were finding that the paper, it was hard to get the baskets back until the custodian came up with this brilliant idea of you just screw one into the waste station and then allow the students to stack on top of that. They would actually collect it for you. And again, you could just wash this in the 3-sink system. Fortunately, that stopped for COVID at the moment, but we're hoping to reboot that soon. Nancy alluded to that we're trying to work with a mobile dish service called DishJoy, and they are looking to pivot because they're not being, since a lot of people are working from home now, they're wanting to look at K through 12 schools as potential places to wash their dishes. We've proposed 2 pilots with 2,000 students in like 3 different sites, one for Oakland, one for Alameda. And Plastic Free Restaurants is going to purchase all these nice stainless steel items, and then they're going to come in and wash them. And they will do the pickup and the drop off. So all the nutrition staff has to do is just kind of grab what is dropped off and get that ready for the next day, whatever that might look like. And they're saving, the cost analysis is huge, but like milk cartons in particular, milk dispensers are a potential cost saving that is talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in the year. So definitely look at those milk cartons and the milk dispensers as potential reusables. Next slide, please. Cool. So how do we actually make all this stuff happen? Again, I really want to encourage that if you want to start this conversation, just start identifying potential partners. If I were a nutrition staff, the first person I would want to talk to is the custodian and just be like, hey, I'm tired of all this waste. Are you tired of all this waste? I bet I know what the custodian will say. And it's like, do you think we could try to like reusables, and then you just start like, well, what would we have to do? Maybe we should get some students involved. Maybe we should talk to the principal about this. Are there local government agencies that can help with this transition, provide funding? And then get the students involved. So when we do these kind of flips for the cafeteria, you think it's a small thing, but it's actually lots of moving parts. So we have a big launch, we bring in we can bring in like a mascot, we bring in partners, we have students take a pledge. Make it a big deal, make it a big announcement, get the principals sign off and get them to participate in this big deal, like help them sort, have them help sort during a lunch one time, or have them come to the assembly one time to announce this stuff. That is a great way to, again, get this ball rolling. And again, the last thing, start small and it will balloon up. That's all I got for now. First, let me promote, I am doing a dish machine webinar tomorrow with folks across the country, and we have a dish auditor who can answer some of those questions a little bit more in depth than I can, but I'm going to wing it really quick. The dish machine, the door types, which are going to be probably your best bet for the elementary school level, can do 65 racks in about an hour. And what they do is you kind of put this door down, they steam it, you're right, they put some chemicals in, and then they can recycle the water and do it again. And it takes about two minutes maybe to sanitize that rack. The water usage when you're looking at a sink and a dish machine is way lower than it used to be. Like I said, in the 80s, the reason that they started ripping out dish machines was because there was a drought in California and on the West Coast, and they were like, these things are not water efficient. They've been made to be way more water efficient than they used to be. The energy, again, also way more efficient than they used to be. But I would also challenge the notion that this is energy efficient in the slightest. Remember, this could be being shipped from China. The PFAS that are in this one are also a super pollutant. So they produce HCFC23 at the chemical plant Chemours in Louisville, Kentucky, which actually pollutes more than all the cars driving in Louisville over a year. The chemical that they're releasing, the pollutant they're releasing, is 17,000 times worse than CO2 as a heating agent. So to me, like, the solution is a lot. Again, I do understand dish machines complicated. I do understand that the schools might have to invest a little bit more in some of these water energy resources, but $17,000 to buy trays for 1 year is also an investment, and I think it won't weigh up compared to what you'll get back with a dish machine. To me, lunch is the low-hanging fruit because potentially it will be centralized again after COVID. But like breakfast in the classrooms, I think is pretty popular and is here to stay. And we are not quite ready to figure out how to tackle that. But I think a dish machine for the lunch situation is a good first step. And then we can try to figure out how to get the dishes potentially from the classroom to the dish machine, or if we even want to do that.
There was one question in the chat, Ben, about dishwasher services. So if you could answer that, if you can, and then we will move to our next speaker. But Emma, can you put Joanna in the same breakout group as Ben? Okay, great. We'll put you all together so you can keep on talking.
Yeah. And I just want to say, yes, I hear your frustration. I know I'm just coming in and just saying these things like it's the easiest thing. I know, like, we need like top-down policy change. I'm hoping that bill that gets that 40,000 that's absolutely dedicated to dish machines and kitchens. It's like it can't be used for anything else but dish machines, and it's on top of already the grants you can get, will pass, and that will help California, and I'm hoping it will spread. But like, that's the best I can do right now is hope. But yes, I 100% understand the frustration around the labor piece and the space piece, and like, why are we correcting something we did 30 years ago? It's just like, come on. But yeah, that's the best I can do right now.
Wonderful. And then Ben, can you quickly answer, do you know of any dishwashing services available for that can come and take, let me read it, that you can pick, that would pick up dirty dishes and then drop off clean trays?
Yeah. So the Dish Joy is in the Bay Area. They're exploring that Dishcraft. It's also in the Bay Area, and they're exploring that, but they prefer to use their ceramic dishes, which is not really an option for K through 12 school. Dispatch is very interested in this, but they're also kind of bogged down with like they're increasing their sources across the board, and getting some of their stainless steel, getting some of their supply is really tough right now. But yeah, depending on your zip code, shoot me an email and I will see if I can find one. And if I can't find one, we will figure out like if there's a entrepreneur who'd be interested in doing some of this work.
Well, and Ben, didn't Dishjoy say that they're trying to get a partnership with somebody in Los Angeles to carry the work down there?
Yep, Dishjoy's looking in LA. They're also looking in Washington and Oregon. And I think they're willing to go where the action is. So if you can get a few school sites that would be down for this, I think that would be very compelling to them to try to figure out how to make a hub.
All right, team. Can you all see my PowerPoint, which is just like a blank white screen? Great. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Annalisa, who is here like on her vacation, coming in and joining us all the way, I think, from Spain. So Annalisa, thank you so much for being here.
Super happy to be joining you all. When I was talking with Nora about this presentation, we were really excited about it months ago. So I made it work around my spring break. But yeah, my name is Annalisa Bellis. I represent Stop Waste, which is a government agency representing Alameda County in the Bay Area in California. I work on our food waste reduction team, and we have a number of programs that support schools in waste reduction as well. And so, yeah, I'm just here today to kind of talk about some strategies for preventing wasted food, many of which I'm sure that you all will be familiar with, but you know, in the spirit of visioning together collectively, it doesn't hurt to kind of bring those up and really discuss them. And if there are some, you know, that you recognize and you're like, oh yeah, we haven't done that. And, you know, just like this last conversation with Ben about, you know, the challenges and barriers, like I would love for you to bring those up as well, because I think that's what's the value of this group, is really kind of bringing up those challenges and troubleshooting together. So yeah, so the first strategy for preventing wasted food that I wanted to talk about is simply recess before lunch. And I know I hear you, you know, I heard some of you mentioning like it's a struggle to kind of just get some time back from instruction so that students have time to eat lunch. But if that's a challenge, I wonder if, you know, maybe there's an opportunity to, if your lunch schedules aren't structured already, to support for students to be playing right before they eat. That is a proven strategy where schools that have adapted that model report that students do eat more of their fruits and vegetables and drink more milk and waste less food. And in addition to being better behaved in the classroom and playground. So that's one strategy that has been proven. And we've been trying to get some schools to really pilot it and have some studies on that. But yeah, it's a good one. And then you also are likely super familiar with the Smarter Lunchroom strategies or the Smarter Lunchroom scorecard, which has a number of best practices, you know, for making the lunchroom a place where students will, you know, there are choices that students can make and children can make behaviorally to choose better foods and to eat the foods that they choose and so on. One of which is serving cut fruit instead of whole fruit. And, you know, I know it sounds really basic, but, you know, Nancy and I can't tell you, sometimes we've seen in school lunch rooms where, a small child is trying to open an orange with their hands and it takes them like half the lunch period. And then the bell rings right when they're about to take the first bite of the orange. And that's just one of the saddest things to see. So definitely serving, you know, cut fruit instead of the whole fruit, especially for a difficult item like that, is one way to reduce the food waste. And sometimes you really don't know until you're actually looking in the waste bin to see what items are being thrown away, or observing in the lunchroom what students are having trouble eating. Next, I wanted to talk about Take It to Go, which is actually a slogan that Oakland Unified has been using to encourage students to take their items that they're not able to eat in the lunchroom for whatever reason, maybe they don't have enough time, they have too much food to eat, or they're too excited to go run and play because maybe they don't have, maybe their recess is right after lunch. But basically, this is some signage just encouraging students that they can take these items with them. I'm sure it might vary, on your school site, whether which items they can take outside of the cafeteria and whether they can take them directly to their classroom or put it in their backpack or can continue eating it on the schoolyard. And Nora, if you could just click once to pop up something that I wanted to bring up, that for Take It To Go, it does definitely requires coordination with the rest of the folks at your school sites, because we have seen some signage from some of our school districts that kind of has a contradictory message and saying that students are not allowed to take food from the cafeteria, when in fact it is something that's allowed by the CDE, but perhaps maybe it became a school policy because maybe it was a litter issue from the custodian who, doesn't have capacity to clean litter or wrappers that end up outside on the schoolyard or so on. So there definitely needs to be some coordination to make sure that this is an understanding of, if you're going to do Take It To Go, that it's understood through all of the different levels of the school support staff, so that there's clarity on there, and that kids aren't getting mixed messages about teachers telling them, hey, like you can take that with you to finish eating it, and then someone else telling them that they can't do that. So yes, next slide, please. So those are just some of the basic preventative strategies, and I mentioned this earlier, but taking a look at what's being wasted in your school lunch is super valuable, and it might not be something that you find the time to do often. But when you can do it, it's very informative. And Ben has been part of some of these, and so has Nancy. And every time we do one, it's very illuminating to show what food types are being wasted. So this is a photo of a food waste audit that we've done in a school, where we just basically took the compost bags and or the trash bags, depending on your sorting system, and just put together all of the food items. So, the strawberries went together and all the cheeseburgers and pizzas. And that just allows you to visually see, what is the impact on that day of all of the wasted food. And then you can more quickly identify what are some of the items that you would maybe want to pay attention to, or maybe think more creatively about how to make them more appetizing, or how can we get feedback from the students to help make sure that they're eating more of those items instead of them going to waste. And there are ways that you could potentially partner up with your science classes, or maybe even environmental studies classes, for them to do the audits themselves, which is also a really great learning opportunity and educational activity for them. Next slide, please. And then I also wanted to talk about food share tables. And I know that food share tables are fairly well known by this point, especially in California, but I just wanted to highlight that investing in your food share station will pay off. And one, and for example, does your food share table have very clear signage with images of what items can be shared? Does it have a designated bin with an ice pack that is managed by your kitchen staff to maintain the cold temperature of milk or other items that should be staying cold? Does it have a separate bin for hot items? Because if you put a cold milk next to a hot lasagna, both of those things are very quickly going to become unappetizing if they're right next to each other, warming each other or cooling each other down. And in addition to kind of messing with the food safety temperature zone there. So once you're able to really separate out those designated spaces, it makes it a lot easier for students to just, determine where to put items. And also it actually really encourages them to take from that table as well. And some of the data that we've found in working with our schools, and in some cases where students were actually tracking and recording the data, there's a little infographic here that shares that in a single week, at one school, there were 226 hot entrees that were actually selected from the food share cart, meaning some student had selected the food from the food line and then put it in the food share cart, and then someone else 226 times took those items to actually consume on their own. So the food share table really is preventing food waste by allowing students to share food between themselves. And I also did want to clarify that, we are kind of emerging from our post-COVID and still existing in a COVID world, but food share tables are allowed to continue as they were before the pandemic, at least in our county, in Alameda County. But it is important to definitely connect with your local environmental health department to get that clarification as well on doing that. And then I also just wanted to mention that another data point is that another school found that 200 pounds of food was the weight of the items that were left on the food share table after a single day's lunch period. So that just kind of begs the question, well, what happens if you have a ton of surplus food on your food share cart, and which I'll address on the next slide. So if you have a lot of food left over on your food share table or cart at the end of the meal service, something you should be aware of is that you are able to actually take back some of those items and reserve them, possibly. It just takes some coordination and getting the procedures down. So for example, whole fruit items like apples or oranges, things with a peel, as long as they're not bruised, they visibly look okay to be reserved. And one example as well is, I know that for the breakfast after the bell programs, like maybe, the fruit that went out in the bags didn't all get eaten. So those apples can be taken back into the kitchen and then served during lunchtime. That's one example. But from the food share cart, you can actually take some of those items back and then reserve them the next day, especially those shelf-stable items like raisins or graham crackers, even things like carrots, because, the carrots are served cold, but they don't necessarily have to be cold all the time. And I did put a red box around things that are definitely not allowed to be reserved or are tricky, like hot entrees and milk. And technically milk can be reserved. The CDE does allow for that, but it's very tricky because you have to have a procedure to make sure that the milk hasn't been reserved twice, and you have got to make sure that it stays in the safe temperature zone. So it's just not something we usually recommend. That's something that's easier to donate if you have extra. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to highlight too, these are some pictures from a single school in our county that has been donating their surplus food at the end of a couple times a week. So they'll kind of collect everything a few days in a row and then donate when they've got a large amount. But these are some pictures, and you can see that there's plenty of foods that they're perfectly good. They potentially might not even need to be donated. They could potentially be reserved. If you look closely, like, for example, maybe there's some of those bananas still look like they're green, and there's also those red cups are actually applesauce. So unless the applesauce is close to the best by or sell by or expiration date, those can theoretically be reserved because applesauce is shelf stable, right? And then, the fruit quality is a question as well. But yeah, so it's interesting because if you think about the food share cart in combination with the surplus that you have left on there, and then potentially if you're considering donating the surplus food, maybe take a look at what you're actually generating for donation and start to think about, are there ways that we can actually be, recirculating some of these items, especially with supply chain issues. If you don't know if you're going to get another shipment of applesauce, if you are able to kind of bring that back into your rotation using the food share cart instead of donating it and giving it away, that might be something to look into. Next slide, please. I also, as I mentioned, food donation, I also wanted to highlight, Nancy kind of touched on this in the very, very beginning, but specifically, there's a new California state law called SB 1383 that is going to be requiring schools as local education agencies to donate the maximum amount of surplus edible food that's generated at each school site. So essentially, it's going to be requiring schools to look at donating any extra food that they generate. And the whole point of the law is really we're trying to like reduce greenhouse gases and we're trying to reduce food waste. And if there is surplus food that is fit for human consumption, we're trying to get that food to feed people. And, but as I mentioned, food donation is potentially kind of the last thing that you should be looking at if you're really methodically kind of going down the line on how you can prevent food waste. And honestly, that would probably be the easiest way to comply with the laws if you were not generating any food waste at all. So that's the vision that we're trying to aim for. But, in some cases, of course, there's always going to be surplus. But one model that you might consider looking into that Nancy can talk a lot more in detail about is called a Food for Families program, where you might consider trying to partner with a nonprofit. It has to be a 501c3 to comply with the CDE's requirements for school food donation. A 501c3 has to sign on to be the party to intake the food before it is donated to the end recipient, even if it is, someone in the school community. But a Food for Families program model is a lot more efficient than trying to find a food donation partner that can come and pick up your food, can get on the school site, come every day at a particular time for potentially an unknown amount of food. That's a lot more tricky than potentially just setting up a strategy where families could come to the school and, when they pick up their kids, they might be able to pick up an extra bag of food that is surplus from the school day. So that's something that you might want to consider looking into. And another strategy is that there have been some after-school programs who might be willing to sign on as that 501c3 because they already operate on your school campus. And are able to intake that food and then pass it off to families who are part of their program. So that's something to think about and would be happy to talk more about. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. I just wanted to share that Stop Waste has produced a couple resources, including two guides, one on food share tables and one on school food donation, just to kind of help provide a starting point for anyone who's really looking to dive into reducing food waste at their school in those ways. And then we also have produced a video series with training videos. One is it's kind of more aimed at adults as a staff training about why food share tables are important and food donation. One is a very short 15-second animated clip just to kind of show how food share works, which is a good clip to show kids. And there are two other videos, more educational, that are kind of aimed at either a K through 5th grade audience and then like an older high school audience featuring students as well. So we'll drop those links if they haven't been dropped in the chat already. And I know there's been a bunch of chatter in the chat that I haven't been able to keep track of, but I am also happy to answer any questions.
I think most of the chat, Annalisa, has been just dropping fantastic resources on food share carts, etc.
Awesome.
If you could drop those resources into the chat, that would be fantastic. For the sake of time, I'm going to move on to Nancy, but if you are really curious about any questions for Annalisa, either drop the question in the chat and she's happy to answer them, or if you want to just put a smiley face in the chat, we can try to pair you up for our breakout group session. If you want to speak more specifically with her, we can put you with her. So just drop a smiley face if that interests you. Or if you have a specific question, just drop that into the chat. All right, I'm moving on. I'm going to Nancy. Nancy, I'm turning it over to you.
Okay. So I think echoing on what Annalisa was sharing, that a lot of this you probably already know and familiar with, but just in case if not, and then there's some like nuances, and then just right that visioning, like the more we say it, the more reality that things can come into fruition. Okay, so I'm Nancy Deming, Sustainability Manager for Oakland Unified School District. I have a unique shared position that's between custodial and nutrition services. So there's a lot of benefits that come with that overlapping position. And then with that position being part-time, that's allowed me to work with any school district in Alameda County, thanks to some grant funding. And then I also am on the Recycle Smart Schools program team that services all the schools in a neighboring county, Central Contra Costa County. Okay, so next slide. So we have already talked about a lot of waste prevention ideas and concepts with what Ben and Annalise are sharing out, but just wanted to remind on that higher importance of waste prevention. And I picked this photo with the salmon going upstream, and especially with that grizzly bear. At first I'm like, no, we don't need the grizzly bear. Well, no, yeah, we do. So the idea of like schools of fish going upstream, and there's that challenge of the grizzly bear, but we still need to keep going at it. And just kind of keeping that vision. So on waste prevention, right, there's the sport kits versus the individual fork and the spoon being plastic versus the reusable, the 5-compartment tray. Well, maybe we can use the paper boat or the reusable boat. That's what Ben was mentioning. And then Annalise is sharing on the food share, right? Originally, a lot of us had the unofficial food share table where it'd be one lonely pair, to then the food share bin, and then the expansion of the food share cart. So it's more of a comprehensive, well-used item. So on that waste prevention. So with those in mind, I've got a few stories to share on, keeping an eye of what is in the waste stream, and on what Annalise was sharing on the waste audits. So a big part of my time does go to look in the waste bins on the campus, but then also looking in the dumpster. So that first photo of the apples and the milk, that's in a dumpster. That was when we were composting our milk cartons. So at least all of this was going to compost, but still, this was milk that was from our breakfast program for our first launch, and then the apples, and that was served that day, but we were oversending on the milk to try to be in compliance. But getting this photo and then kind of talking through the details, we were able to change the procedures. And then again, the middle photo, having, the plastic wrap food, kind of understanding where that's coming from. One of the situations with pizza was I went to one school and saw that the food share was overflowing with the individually wrapped pizzas. And in the compost bin, it had like just a lot of single bites and they're being tossed. And then found out that we had switched our vendor on the pizza, and the students weren't liking this new pizza and they were already familiar with it, which meant it was going straight to the food share for most of it. Quick fix. We switched back to the previous vendor on the pizza, and then the overflow pizza issue, resolved itself. Chow mein, one of our schools was known for kind of having an overflowing food share bin, and we're trying to troubleshoot on food donation. And the director at the time was like, go in and find out why is it overflowing? What's the school culture challenges at that site? And we found out that one of the key triggers was chow mein. And I bet many of you can know this. So they're saying there's broccoli in the packaged chow mein. Anybody know what that means? Horrible off-gassing. So by like 9 o'clock in the morning, this off-gassing of the broccoli, even though it's packaged, was going down the hallway. By the time the kids walk into cafeteria, they lost their appetite. They weren't going to eat that chow mein. And it wasn't part of the menu. It wasn't the recipe, but the central kitchen had decided to make that change on their own. Well, back to the central kitchen. Nope, broccoli can't be in that packaged material because of that off-gassing. So it does take some troubleshooting on figuring out like what's hitting the waste stream to prevent it. But there's always so many additional benefits that can take place from it. Okay, so for the waste that we do have, so we have really customized this sorting station, and I don't say waste sorting station when I talk about our mealtime sorting, because it's not all waste because of that food share being such a high priority. And then a special note is on our signage. We've developed this signage that's pre-printed on plastic corrugated boards. And then there's hardware that we've customized on an order so that the signage attaches to the bin so that it's more at the level of the student or the staff that are standing at the bin. That's really beneficial. So with this station setup being so key that we want to have this order followed as much as possible. Next slide. In partnership with Annalisa and her team, we created a meal sorting station guide. You can go to the next slide. Oh, too far. A couple back. There we go. Okay, so then this guide talks about all the benefits of each station spot and the reason for the order. So I highly encourage folks to consider this kind of layout, but in reality, if we can go to the next slide, a lot of times the station setup works better for staff being in a slightly different configuration. And that's okay, as long as there's consistency and the students and staff are all aware of it. Special note that this was during when food share wasn't in operation. So normally we would see food share worked into that as well. Next slide. Thanks to Zeta, who's on the call. Our breakfast after the bell, waste stations in the classroom. Zeta came up with this system and it works really well. So these are just small little containers that can be placed out right after breakfast and the kids to sort, and it can break down and pack up and be off into the corner. And then the students take these waste items out to hallway collection bins that then the custodian services. Next slide, please. So we know with just setting up the stations and signage is not enough. It does require continuous bin monitoring that can be done by adults and ideally by students. So schools approach this differently with setting up formal student green teams that monitor. Some sites have custodians that have students flocking around them, asking to volunteer. But it is key to have constant bin monitoring and, correcting the mistakes before serious contamination happens. And then next slide, please. So we do provide a lot of student and teacher training resources. We've spent a lot of time making a waste sorting 101 video. It's based off of a slide deck. And then we record that. And the ask is that the teachers play this with their students. And then in combination, we ask that they play a Kahoot game right with it in combination, and that double reinforcement really helps on students understanding what goes where. And then we provide a lot of additional kind of activities and games that folks can consider to use. With teachers being so impacted, this one's been a little tricky. And one of the reasons we did our slide deck on these resources is just so it's at the teacher's fingertips. Because our participation that we've had in the past is drastically reduced, and gearing up for a new school year, then that way the resources, the activity booklets can be, shared in a very concise way that teachers follow is the hope. Next slide. So kitchen bin setups and signage. As we've talked about, it's really important to have the kitchen staff owning those bins and figuring out where best location. And as we know, every kitchen is unique. So it takes kind of a site walkthrough of the kitchen to figure out what size bins and where they can be kept. A lot of times it means putting them on single dollies so they can be moved around easily, determining the volume of material for what size bins are needed. And then it's always important to go back over, a few months' time, periodic checks, just to make sure that they're sorting properly. It can really upset staff if they're thinking that they're sorting properly and then they find out that they're not and they're spending the time. So they always appreciate knowing what goes where and kind of walking through some of those specifics with them on a regular basis. Next slide, please. So food service training, as we've talked about as well, right? Getting them on board, having them understand what's at hand. It's really important to understand, share out on SB 1383 and AB 827, which requires the bins to be in place so they know what, we're all up against. And figuring out how that training can work best, where if it's, as frequent as possible, just to kind of change that culture and for them to be thinking through options to improve upon. And it is really helpful to what we've found is treating at least one of the trainings per year as professional development. So in a lot of the trainings that I do, I try to watch like a documentary with the staff. So it might be, if folks are familiar with Just Eat It or the Straws movie, that gives them a larger picture of what we're up against on climate change and issues that are beyond the school walls, for them to kind of have a better understanding and be more motivated and engaged with the work that they're doing at their school site and with the students as well, right? Just having an understanding of climate change. And then next slide. And we've talked about this as well on the custodial partnership and teamwork. That is one reason why I really appreciate my job being partnered between the two departments on working between food service and the custodians, because their work overlaps between the cafeteria. So having the custodians buy in and figuring out some of the work duties goes a long way. And a lot of times it could be the custodians that are the champions, but the student green teams, the first picture is the custodian plus the food service staff. They're partnered together with the green team at their school. So that partnership with custodial is really key. And then lastly, to share out, for about a year now, we've had a Zero Waste Schools Committee with an organization called Northern California Recycling Association. And one of the key focuses for the work that our committee has been doing is hosting webinars. And we've done, I think, 7 now. And then there's also a spreadsheet where we've started curating a lot of resources that we're using onto this spreadsheet. It does say the next webinar is on signage, but it's actually going to be on food share and food donation, because that is percolating to the top for a lot of folks. And especially in our last webinar, that became a very lively discussion. We are in conversation with California Department of Education and the Western Region USDA team to see about them attending this next webinar that we have on, is it May 12th? They're checking in with both of their teams to see about attending. So we're looking forward to that one. And I'll pass it back to you, Nora.
All right, great, everyone. Well, for the sake of time, I'm going to have us go into breakout groups. And if you all could discuss, I'm going to drop some questions into the chat. If you could just discuss, what are you doing right now? Any thoughts that come to mind, reflections? What are some of the barriers? And then also, what resources are you needing? Are you needing signages or physical materials or posters or funding or staff training? What do you need? How can we support you? So I'm going to put us into breakout groups so we can get started in discussing, and we'll probably have about 13 minutes for a conversation. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you all for staying on. I see all the waving. That's so wonderful. Great to see all of you. So we have only a few minutes left before the end of our call. I did want to I'm wondering how best to do this. One thing, I just wanted to give a few quick announcements of our next session. So our next session will be on Wednesday, April 13th. From 1:30 to 3 o'clock. So again, we do every other Wednesday at this time. This is really going to be, the next session is really going to be focused on leadership development and building allies. So how do you really like create a vision for your school meal program and put that into action? And how do you garner support for that? Because we know for a lot of you, like that is part of your job, is to really foster leadership. But with that said, I feel like with this whole series, it feels sort of rushed in that like we present this topic and then we all get into breakout groups and we start talking about it. And then it's like the end of the call. So I'm going to throw up a Zoom poll of like, of these topics that we just, we've been kind of going throughout the series. Which would you like to hear more about? If we have a little bit more time on our session next in 2 weeks from now, what would you like to learn more about? So if you could kind of click which box, I know probably a lot of you feel like you want to click more than one. Try to pick which one kind of really resonates with you as like would be a top choice where you're like, nah, I really, really want to, I just want to spend some more time on it. And that would be really good feedback because we can probably integrate that into our next session. We might even do breakout groups depending on different topics, kind of dedicated. Carrie, I like your all of the above. Yeah. And then the other question that kind of came up, and I'd love for people to come off of mute. As Nancy, Annalisa, Ben, and I were kind of putting this session together, as you could tell, this session was like really PowerPoint heavy because there's just so much information that can be shared. I think each one of these topics could be its own, like an entire session focused on that. And so just wondering, like, thinking about the end of this year or going into next school year, is this a conversation that you want to continue to be a part of? Is it something that you want to create like more of a series on? What would be really beneficial to you all in terms of the topic we just talked about today? So we don't just feel like, oh, we just talked about it and then we left, like really to make sure that you all have the resources that you need. And also we can kind of, again, create this as like a peer-to-peer space to continue to collaborate. And Ben, Nancy, or Annalisa, I don't know if you all want to come off of mute and elaborate on that. I'm seeing a thumbs up. Maybe I explained it. Okay. I think the question is, what else do you need around this topic we talked about today in terms of an ongoing discussion? Is it something that you want to learn more about? Is it something you want to regroup on? Yeah. What resources are you needing?
We have a monthly call on food serviceware, on reusables that we do monthly, and that's national. Folks come onto that. And then we have one for like the Bay Area that's alternative week. So if anybody wants to consider that, contact Ben.
Yeah, Ben, can you drop your email in the chat actually? And then do we have the, there is going to be a webinar tomorrow on dishware, which is kind of perfect timing. So if you are interested, feel welcome to join that. And then, yeah, Ben, Annalisa, Nancy, any final words before we wrap up?
All are very powerful together, and I just don't want anyone to feel like they're alone. I know this can be super lonely work, but like I just want you to know that like CH, Nancy, like we're resources that you can just call on, and like we're really responsive, and we want to help you with whatever around nutrition, even if it's just a vent. Like we want to help.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. I just dropped their emails in the chat. This has been something we've been like talking about to do. We've been most excited about this session for a long time. So I really appreciate it and all the resources shared. We definitely need to be kind of a group going upstream together, as Miguel just mentioned. So We appreciate it. We'll see you all in 2 weeks. It's definitely going to be a lot more breakout groups depending on what you're looking for and what you want to discuss, and then some experts and resource sharing, and some leadership strategies. So looking forward to that, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks, everyone.